Bienvenidos a Contragolpe. Welcome to Contragolpe. On today's episode, we're going to discuss the Chicano-Mexicano divide. But right before we get into the segment, and using AI, I translated into audio a letter that was written by Robert Lansing back in 1924 on how he can manipulate Mexican Americans, without using a single bullet. I want you to listen to this and let that sink in.
Letter from former U.S. Secretary of State Robert Lansing to William Randolph Hearst regarding the campaign by Hearst's newspaper chain to install an American as president of Mexico and put an end to the Mexican Revolution, which threatened the interests of large American corporations, primarily in the oil industry. Mexico is an extraordinarily easy country to dominate because all it takes is controlling a single man, the president, writes Lansing. And accordingly, he advises, we must abandon the idea of installing an American citizen in the Mexican presidency, as that would only lead us, once again, to war. The solution requires more time. We must open the doors of our universities to young, ambitious Mexicans and make the effort to educate them in the American way of life, in our values, and in respect for the leadership of the United States. Mexico will need competent administrators, and over time, these young people will come to occupy important positions and will eventually take possession of the presidency itself. And without the United States having to spend a single cent or fire a single shot, they will do what we want, and do it better and more radically than we ourselves could have done. Robert Lansing, former Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson, 1924.
The main issue, well, there's a lot of issues, but one of the things that those of us that are at a younger generation are noticing that hate has been amplified by so much. I was discussing with a friend that, we walk around the store the other day and now we're seeing people more in a challenging mode, right? Like, I saw a man, purposely staring at me, and he was clearly a white European man. And he's staring at me, and for no reason, right? Maybe he's trying to figure out, if this guy's a Mexican, right? And we're noticing a lot of that, just kind of, or people trying or driving around with Trump flags, doing things to incite some kind of fight or just violence, period. And not alone social media. Consider myself Chicano. I consider myself a Mexican person. I've always had a connection with my roots in Mexico, and I've just grew up differently. Spent a lot of time out there as a kid. So, but I also totally understand, and sympathize with brothers that want to call themselves Chicanos, and I totally get it, right?
Yeah.
But through all the years growing up here in LA, in Orange County, and witnessing the difference between communities, I'm really shocked to see how much the Chicano, or let's just say Mexican American community has changed. For example, and more, they've turned more to the conservative side. In my opinion, they've sort of, been targeted by, all this Republican propaganda, right? This whole America First MAGA propaganda. In my day, right? I mean, I remember I was in high school in 1996, and I remember Chicanos back in the day. We had codes and rules, right? And even though they didn't necessarily consider themselves people, Mexicans from Mexico, they always came out in the defense of Mexican people if they were undocumented. I remember they would be, it was ugly during my time. I remember riots at school, and I remember they always, Chicanos, the gangbangers and just regular Chicanos would be like, only we can discriminate our own, right? You can't. So we would come out, right? We would come out and we would defend, raza that was immigrants. Even though, a lot of them, like I said, didn't consider themselves necessarily Mexicans from Mexico. And now that has changed completely. Like, you see a rise of influencers, they call them, supporting the whole Trump movement and totally flipping and saying, well, if they were here illegal, like pushing that same narrative. So I'm like, well, we need to get down to understand what we need to understand what's been happening to the Chicano community in the last 30 years that I feel that's flipped, you know? Would you think that,
Well,
what have you seen?
I think you're right. I think there's different tendencies going on in our movement because, well, there's, and people mainly point to the folks that have voted for Trump, Chicanos and Latinos that voted for Trump as kind of a phenomenon that we hadn't seen before, because clearly there was an increase in the vote for pretty much openly racist platform, not just on immigration, but almost everything. So I think that has happened, and I think it's folks that have the illusion that it gives them a pass into into white privilege, into the dominant population, and they don't understand, because they don't. A lot of them, it's not their fault. They don't know history. That we're not like the European waves of European immigrants who, by the second generation, were assimilated into the dominant white population. We've since the United States, stole Mexico's northern territories in the 1840s, we've had generation after generation of people that have come across the border or been here before, like my family. My family was here when this was Mexico, in Colorado and New Mexico. So we've been here forever. Why haven't we been able to assimilate like the Italians and the Poles and the Irish? Because we are a conquered people. We are a conquered people, and we are largely a people of color. So the conquest, to understand us, Jose, we need to understand the impact of the annexation of Mexico's northern territories. One thing it did was it enabled the United States to become the dominant superpower in this country. So U.S. capitalism is, as we know, is a racial capitalism beginning with the dispossession and genocide of the indigenous peoples, and then 400 years or more of enslaved labor, African labor. But the other piece of it that's so central was the annexation of Mexico's northern territories, which allowed for a major expansion of the white settler population, access into the creation of a port system all along these coasts that facilitated trade with the Pacific Rim, some of the most fertile agricultural land in the world, and access to vast resources, not just fossil fuel resources, but vast resources of copper, silver, lithium, everything that you can think of was in these northern territories of Mexico. So that's the one impact, is it enabled the United States to become a superpower. The second thing it did was it made Mexico a dependent nation of the global south, almost a neo-colony at different times. So Mexico's status in relation to the United States, it's the only invasions in Mexico where there's been like a dozen. It wasn't just what happened in the 1840s.
Oh yeah.
So there's been political and economic and sometimes military domination in Mexico. And generally the PRI and the PAN would bend the knee.
Yeah.
Also with NAFTA or whatever else. The other question that we have to ask for the annexation is what happened to the conquered people in those territories? So for the indigenous people that represented an expansion of the warfare against the indigenous people and the efforts at genocide and dispossession. So they just expanded it from the east and the Midwest into the Southwest in these conquered territories, including using black soldiers, the Buffalo soldiers,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
were used in the wars, the U.S. wars against indigenous peoples. So it just exacerbated that oppression and dispossession. What about the Mexican people that lived there? Well, the conquest meant, Jose, that we could no longer evolve along with the developing Mexican nation. So while we had contacts and people were constantly crossing the border, Mexico developed as a nation of the global south with its own particular characteristics, a lot of which, like yourself and others, we still hold on to. But we were not able to, because of the conquest, we didn't develop in that territory, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Southern Colorado, California, as part of the Mexican nation. So what happened?
Yeah.
Where did the idea of Chicano come from? Because we realized we were not part of the dominant nation. We were not Americanos, but we were not completely Mexicano either. So the idea, and that's where Yo Soy Joaquin and a lot of these poetic expressions of it says, We are something unique. And imperialism does this all the time. There was no Panama. There was no Kuwait. Imperialism carved up countries and new nations developed.
Yeah.
So we developed, but as an oppressed nation. So if you look in every area of life, wealth accumulation, poverty, income, salaries, education, healthcare, relationship to the criminal justice system, there's massive inequality. People may have illusions that we've made it because some people are better off.
Yeah.
But if you look at all the statistics, we still have significant inequality in relationship to the white population.
That's true.
So
And-
even
and-
Los Angeles, for example,
Mhm.
Los Angeles as an urban area is the second wealthiest in the world after Seoul. Seoul is the wealthiest urban area in the world. Los Angeles is the second. But the average wealth of Mexicanos, Chicanos and Mexicanos in Los Angeles is $3,900. Dude, you can't even buy a good used ranfla for $3,900.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's
So
fact.
it's $114,000 for the average white family. It's about $3,900, $3,800 for the average African American family. But that's what it is for us. So there's this massive inequality. But who benefits from that? It's the 1%.
Exactly.
So that's where I think that's where this idea, and for a lot of the revolutionary sector of the Chicano movement, the Crusade for Justice, Partido, sectors of the Brown Berets, Casa, August 29th movement, the perspective has always been Chicano-Mexicano unity. We should not be played. We are
Yes.
a united people, even though we have this imposed border on us, and even though we've evolved in somewhat different ways, like our folks grow up hearing black music like everybody else
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
So that's where I think, this idea comes, but there's always been that question of solidarity, with the Magones, the anarquistas, in Tlatelolco. A lot of the folks that escaped from Mexico came here and became kind of movement.
No, you're right. And I want you to hear, I found this article that was fantastic. It was by a writer. His name is Robert Cohen out of the University of New Mexico. And this blew, I mean, these are things we already knew, but he puts it in a way, he puts it in a context that just once again reinforces everything that's happening now and why we as a Mexican people are going through this today. And it's really important that
It didn't just
There
start with
isn't-
Trump. He's right. It didn't start with Trump.
yeah, but even in just us as a Mexican people, period. Because right before I go to that audio that I think you're gonna really enjoy, part of the problem is that we do not understand who we are as a people. Because if we did, we would have way more strength and we would be able to knock down every single argument against us. But the fact that if someone comes out today and says they are Mexican, they are accused of being, oh, well, you're just some half breed, a European. I'm surprised how many.
Yeah, we're pochos, yeah.
Yeah, no, but they'll say, like, it depends who tells you, right? Like, you'll see, like, if it's an Anglo person, they will completely laugh at the idea that you say you're part Indian as well.
Yeah, yeah.
They completely laugh at that. You're like, you're insane.
There's an interesting phenomenon. So my son, Ramon, my younger son, works at the UPS warehouse in Lincoln Heights, right over by the San Antonio winery. And he's worked there for years. And there's a lot of young Chicano workers on his line. And they were all Trumpistas because they got everything from social media, including Spanish language social media.
Oh,
Where there's 4 and 5 times as many ads for the Republicans as there were for the Democrats on Spanish language social media. So they were all Trumpistas, and part of it was the machismo and,
yes.
big bangs and blah, blah, blah. Now they're fucking hanging their heads, dude. One of them was in tears because he believed the bullshit that when they did the massive deportation campaign, they were just going to go after the criminales, right? The bad guys. And the head of ICE, the Border Patrol, said, if you cross the border, you're a criminal. You violated the law. He says, my mom is sick. I can't go to Mexico and visit her because I don't know if I'll get back. He said tears were in his eyes. He says, so the reality of U.S. racial capitalism is starting to assert itself. So they had illusions, you know,
Yeah.
we go this way, we're going to be accepted, we're going to be able to live the American dream. And now they're finding out that, this is a racial capitalism. And even though I'm Güero, my name is Gallegos, I'm a dirty Mexican. That's
Oh,
how,
yeah.
that's how it was in Colorado. Our family, like a lot of Chicano families that after the concert, we were farmers, man. But we ended up in the coal mines. My abuelo went into the mines at the age of 11, and him and two of my tios died of black lung.
Wow.
So that was, and that was the period of like in Salt of the Earth of the Mexican rape, where the
Yeah.
white miners got this, and my mom, I recorded a lot of her reflections on her life. She remembers she was in Southern Colorado because we were miners on both sides of the family, the Mayas and the Gallego side. That the Klan used to burn crosses on Fisher's Peak, which was, where you could see it from all the little pueblitos in Southern Colorado. And I said, "The Klan?" She says, "Yeah." She said, "We didn't know what it was, but it scared us." And I said, "But there were no black people in in there." She says, "No, it was against the Mexicans and the Italian immigrants
Yeah.
because they
Oh,
were
yeah.
unionizing the mines. They were
Wow.
unionizing the mines." So we lost our land. So that's why the Chicano movement, as it evolved as a movement, and its left wing said, "We are entitled to self-determination. We have national rights that includes rights to our land, like the Indios, and rights to self-government."
Yeah.
And that was the left wing of the movement. That was the crusade. That was the Alianza. That was the sectors of the Brown Berets. That was the August 29 movement. And now, you're pointing to this phenomenon where some, people are being led to the Republicans, but there's a phenomenon that there's an expansion now, growth of the Brown Berets, and they're studying Marxism.
Yeah.
They're studying
Yeah.
Marxism,
Yeah.
So
So
there's two things going on here. Is one, people are being kind of pulled in this direction to be, but even in the elections, our population more than any other ethnic population has the lowest rate of votes. We have a fairly significant number of eligible voters, but our turnout rate is the worst. We are the no vote party.
yeah. Well, right before we get into this, because this is going to be great. What I did is I was trying to figure out how to get people to hear this, because it's actually it's text, right?
Yeah.
So I translated it, online now with all this magic AI stuff. I don't want people to think that the voice they're listening to is the person that wrote it. No. So let's listen to it because everything you just talked about, it's been very well explained. And I'm going to pause it a few times so we could discuss because this is great.
Throughout the history of war and conflict, adversaries have utilized race as a medium through which they are able to dehumanize each other. For numerous combatants, the supposed racial and social inferiority of the enemy validates killing as well as conquest. The Texas Revolution of 1835-1836 proves no exception to this trend. During this period of extreme ethnic turbulence, the majority Anglo population of Texas viewed Mexicans, the native-born Tejanos, in a negative light as the inferior other. However, perhaps more importantly, Anglos, immigrants from slave states for the most part, judged Mexicans through the lens of comparison to Native Americans and African Americans, races Anglos already deemed as subordinate. According to the bulk of the Anglo population in Texas, Mexicans maintained racial and social bonds with blacks and Indians. As a result, revolution from Mexico appeared the only alternative to an existence Anglos perceived to be under half-breeds and false friends. One of the more popular Anglo viewpoints towards the Mexican was as a half-breed, a dilution of the blood of Spaniards with that of Indians. Countless Anglos wrote of the racial heritage shared by Mexicans and Indians. For instance, William B. Travis wrote in May 1835 that if the Mexicans murdered the captive Stephen F. Austin, 1,000 of their contemptible red skins shall be sacrificed to his name. Furthermore, Robert Wilson declared in June 1835 that Santa Anna was not only an enemy to Texas, but also the reincarnation of Montezuma, an emperor of the Aztecs. These descriptions sought to degrade Mexicans, proving their racial inferiority from a genealogical standpoint. In addition, these accusations strengthened the Anglo claim that white and Mexican societies were inassimilable. Since most settlers in Texas hailed from the southern half of the United States, and thus a chattel society, they would have frowned upon any sort of interracial amalgamation, even if they were not slaveholders themselves. As James Crisp summarizes, even when the distinction was made between white and Indian Mexicans, the great extent of race mixture between these two groups left the Americans uneasy about all Mexicans. Due to these perceptions of Mexicans as half-breeds, it comes as no surprise that Anglos felt that their society was diametrically opposed to that of the Mexicans. As a result of the shared bloodlines of Mexicans and Indians, Anglos often viewed Mexicans as savages. At his address in the town of San Felipe, R.M. Williamson warned that Texans would hear around your habitations the Indian yell, mingling with the Mexican cry and the shrieking of your murdered wives, rousing the slumbers of the cradle from the midst of your burning buildings. Many Anglos insisted that racial miscegenation caused depravity, in their view, an inherent trait for Mexicans. Yet, this degeneracy extended further than bloodlust, as Anglos perceived Mexicans to be indolent and uncultured, additional comparisons to Native Americans. Anglos habitually complained of the lewdness of their darker neighbors, illustrated through the complacency of Mexicans to appear naked in public. Anglos did not view this action as harmless, but rather as an example of Mexican barbarity. Mexicans also seemed content to live in utter squalor, with no impulse to improve their station in life. This too pointed towards the seemingly undeniable claim that Mexican and Anglo cultures were contradictory. Arnoldo de Leon explains that Mexicans seem to lack the spirit of enterprise, the drive, the zeal common to American civilization. Thus, many Anglos in Texas shared the sentiment expressed by John Lynn from Guadalupe. Whites deserved better than to live under the regime of Goths and cutthroats. Anglos also tended to view Mexicans as false friends who were disloyal to white culture, and instead partners with African Americans. Consequently, Anglos feared that Mexicans served as traitors in Texas, constantly fomenting servile insurrection among blacks. Ben Milam warned Francis Johnson that the intention of the Mexicans was to gain the friendship of the different tribes of Indians, and if possible to get the slaves to revolt. These plans of barbarity and injustice will make a wilderness of Texas. With the invasion of Santa Anna, Anglos dreaded that the general would reimpose Mexican law, liberating slaves and encouraging black rebellion as he rampaged through Texas. Moreover, since the law forbade the recapture of runaway slaves into Mexico, many Anglos looked upon Mexicans as not only inciting black exodus and uprising, but also scheming to destroy the very way of life for Anglo-Texans. As a result, Anglos asserted that Mexicans were unfit to join the Texan polity. From the viewpoint of a Southern Anglo, it seemed ludicrous that anybody could dispute the subordination of the African American. Instead of placing blacks in their seemingly ordained role as slaves, Mexicans wanted to elevate blacks as equals. Thus, not only did Anglos view Mexicans as foolish and naive in this regard, but also as traitors to the majority of the Texas population. As De Leon encapsulates, at a time when Southern slave masters were suspicious of any nonconformer, Mexicanos were denounced by Anglo-Texans as rascals with no claim to respectability and no knowledge of civilized politics. Ironically, the ostensible alliance between African Americans and Mexicans resulted in the Anglo tagging of Mexicans as tyrants and oppressors. From the mindset of many Anglos, Mexicans were aiming to impose the same system of dependence and bondage on whites as whites were forcing upon blacks. In a public meeting in Nacogdoches, Anglos claimed that they were under the yoke of military oppression, subjected to wallow under a slavish degradation. Under Mexican rule, many Anglos believed that they were treated as veritable second-class citizens. Accordingly, Anglos judged revolution and independence as the only processes through which to preserve their innate love for liberty and to uphold the principles of their American forefathers. Certainly, Anglos viewed themselves as subjugated and questioned whether we are to live as freemen or continue to exist as slaves under military despotism. Through the various comparisons to Native Americans and African Americans, Anglos sought to demonize Mexicans as half-breeds and false friends, among a plethora of other labels. Not only did these allegations seek to justify revolution and eventual separation from Mexico, but also to unite the Anglo communities of Texas against a common foe. Yet the Texas Revolution provides only a singular example of racial dehumanization in the history of world conflict.
That piece there was written by Jack Cohen. This is a very interesting article in how they judged Mexicans through the lens of comparisons to Native Americans and even African Americans, right? People that they already had deemed subordinate. And even today, people here in the United States still don't really know what a Mexican is. It's mind blowing. I mean, I see posts talking about what's a Mexican? Mexicans are not native. Mexicans are European. Like they're not clear about what we are. You know, it's fascinating to me. And even if you do tell them, you know, hey, we're indigenous, one side will tell you you're not. A lot of European Americans or even other races will sit there and argue why you're not Native American or indigenous. And it's clear why it happens. It's clear because it has to do with first in time, first in right. They hate the fact that we are first in time and first in right. And this is what I wanted to tell people, right? And this is another thing that bothers them. It bothers them to the core, and they will not accept the facts that the majority of Mexicans are of indigenous background. It's a very small percentage of people that are not of indigenous heritage. And this is the reason why I keep mentioning that it's important for you to understand your native roots, to understand your background, your history, your culture, right? Because if you did, you would know that you are and you have always been here, right? Whether you're Uto-Aztecan, I mean, where did the Mexica migrate from? What did the Mexica speak, right? What did most tribes in southern United States speak? Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs. I mean, it's mind blowing that now, 2025, that a foreigner will consider a Mexican a foreigner. It's mind blowing.
I think it's really incredible. The thing that I would add to that was the underlying reason was they wanted the land.
Oh, yeah.
So the King Ranch, all of those things that, become part of mythology and how wonderful it is. The idea was they wanted the land that was there in South Texas and other parts of Texas. So they got that like they got it from the Indians through terror and
They did.
violence and legal fraud.
But
So
but if you
that's
if, but if you
also
also
made
hear
to do that, you needed to create a rationale for why you were treating these people so badly. So they're inferior, they're animals, they're immoral. But I think we need to keep sight of the economic imperative that was driving a lot of this. It was ideological, it was white supremacy, but it was founded on the idea of really building an economic empire based on capitalism and exploitation.
oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. But also, what I find also, I mean, and there's more to this, and maybe we don't have time to play all that because it's a lot. But another underlying thing that you keep hearing there is how we still seem to be neither Spaniard or native. You know, here in the United States, there's still people that don't really know, and we see it on social media all the time, don't even know what a Mexican is. They have no idea.
Oh, I know. Yeah,
They're calling us
it could be
Spaniards like we're from Spain.
it doesn't make yeah, that's right. But I think the idea here was, what's the underlying factor? So, the initial thing, and Roxanne Dunbar Thies has written incredible stuff about this. But she says, for example, that when the British came to the United States, what became the United States, they brought all the terrorism and exploitation and oppression that they had developed over centuries in Ireland and unleashed it on the indigenous population. Then, of course, there was the slave trade and enslavement and the building of the slave economy in the South, the slave part of the
Yeah.
capitalist economy. And they created a whole um, set of institutions and repressive institutions to keep the slaves in their place and to try to make certain that there wasn't a slave revolt and an uprising. But, to do this, and you're supposedly Christian, you have to create a rationale. So the rationale is that these are savages, they're inferior, they're immoral, that we are the superior race, and that's the whole idea of white supremacy. So after they stole Mexico's territories, what were they going to do with us? So, we were put into another category of oppression. And then when they brought over Chinese, there was another category of oppression. And Filipinos, there's another category of oppression. So it's a kind of a consistent pattern. But the thing with us is that, we've been here for hundreds and hundreds of years, and our concentration, if you look, Jose, at where our historic areas of concentration, that's still where 90% of Chicanos and Mexicanos live. From that arc from Texas through Arizona, New Mexico, Southern Colorado, Califas, that's still our historic areas of concentration. Of course, we're everywhere now. We're in Maryland, we're in New York, we're in everywhere. But the overwhelming majority, because when Mexicanos came over, they went to the areas where there were us,
Yeah.
where there were people who spoke Spanish, where there was food they were accustomed to, where there were cultures and traditions and music that they were accustomed to. So they assimilated with an oppressed population, just like the Irish could assimilate with the dominant population. Mexicanos, and I'm wondering about Centroamericanos, assimilated with the oppressed population. They weren't going to be able to assimilate with the Anglo-Saxons. Racists made certain that wasn't going to happen. But so they assimilated and they go to the same school. Even now, when they come over here, they go to the same schools, work in the same jobs, face the same thing with the hura,
Yeah. Yeah,
the
they do.
oppression of language and culture and all of that. So I think this is, my criticism of the US left, and it's still valid, is they still see things in mainly a black and white framework.
Yeah.
And there we have this incredible freedom movement that is, since the day one of annexation, the Taos Revolt, where we joined with the indigenous people to defeat the military garrison from the US and capture the governor. From those days, and you're right, the Plan de San Diego out of Texas, we are, the people that wrote that says we are united with the indigenous people and the African Americans. And we will decide, do we want to become part of Mexico or do we want our own nation? That was in 1912. Less than 70 years after the annexation of Mexico's northern territories, already there was this consciousness. So I think that, one of my main things, and I'm on the editorial board of The Nation magazine, is quit ignoring us. So, we had to create our own media, the Chicano Press Association, which started with the Crusade for Justice, El Gallo, had over 100 newspapers. Because when we looked at the media, we were either invisible or we were criminals.
Oh, yeah.
It's still that way.
We're still that way in
The
Hollywood,
dominant
too.
image of us on TV, the perp walk. It's the fucking perp walk.
Oh, my God.
So I think, we begin to create our own institutions, and that's why I say that, people need to understand us as a national liberation movement. We are a movement that developed as one that said, we face in every realm of life, we face oppression, and we are going to free ourselves. We are going to free ourselves so we can speak our own language, practice our own traditions, have our land, govern ourselves, create the kind of economy that works for us. And if that's cooperatives, it's cooperatives. If it's small businesses, it's small businesses. But that's our decision to make because we built this. You want to know where all the money from the mines, that was our labor. The railroads that enabled the United States to become a transatlantic capitalist country, we built that. The the agricultural, all the farmers are worried right now, but the agricultural lands in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and California, who works those lands?
Yeah.
That's us. That's us, billions and billions of dollars. So, I think this, but I think for me as someone who's on the left, I realize that, and I look at it was my own family's history that really kind of, won me to the side of this kind of perspective. But I realize we're not alone. We are allied with the Black freedom struggle. We are allied with the struggle of Filipinos in this country. We are allied with the struggle of poor white workers. We may have to have some struggle with them because they're institutionalized to think they're superior. But I realize that, we have a lot of alliances, and we have alliances with people in Mexico. I'm
Yeah.
part of the Mexico Solidarity Project. We just had a great gathering in Guanajuato. I just got back on Monday night, where we had people from the independent labor movement in Mexico and people from all over this country that wanted to
Mhm.
build solidarity with Mexico because we realize that especially Trump and the MAGA administration are intent on making Mexico bend the knee.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
if they can make Mexico bow down to the US political and economic agenda, they can use that to attack the whole pink tide in Latino America.
Yeah.
'Cause Mexico is a huge anchor for the pink tide.
Do you feel these threats of invasion are real?
Yes. Oh, yeah. They may not need to use it, but let's say they decide, "Okay, we'll use some drones and go after, supposedly a cartel in Zacatecas."
Yeah.
They could give about fentanyl, dude.
Oh, yeah.
About
We all
Tijuana.
know that
They don't
that's
care about any of that.
baloney.
And 75-80% of the weapons that the cartels use come from the US. They don't give a about that. But the idea is, Mexico's resources, Mexico's labor, Mexico's politics. That's what they want. They want them to bend the knee.
My theory is that they definitely don't want Mexico as another state, because what would you do with all the Mexicans? It's clear to us that they don't want it. This is why they would actually say that about Canada, but they wouldn't say that about Mexico, and that's okay. But I also do believe that this has to do with politics and the direction. Well, actually, Donald Trump made it clear he doesn't want Mexico to succeed. This is why now that Mexico is number one in Latin America as far as either trading partner to the United States and economic power, now they want to force the companies to come to the United States. And the worst part of it is like, there are also going to be threats if Mexico decides to open its doors to other nations.
But Sheinbaum is smart. She's not out to provoke Trump.
Oh, no.
So she's been playing it very smart. She, flatters his ego, does all the other kind of stuff. She's had to make some concessions because they are a third world country. They don't have
Yeah.
nuclear. But on the whole, they've maintained this is the limits to what we're going to do. I would like to see Sheinbaum say, we will not cooperate with any ethnic cleansing campaign. But, they're not at that position yet. But, Mexico with 148 million people, with the 12th largest economy in the world, it can help anchor that pink tide. That pink tide, Jose, is happening nowhere else in the world. Not in Europe, not in Africa, not in Asia, only in Latino America do we have 12 countries that have taken either a populist or a leftist position, some degree of anti-imperialism in their politics and their governance. But they can't, Colombia can't anchor it.
No.
Venezuela can't anchor it, but Mexico and Brazil can anchor it. So Rubio, especially as a family, coming from a family of Gusanos, my idea is he wants to restore Latin America as a colony of the United States, as the backyard. They're talking about manifest destiny, resurrect manifest destiny. But the key obstacle to them is not Cuba, it's not Venezuela, it's Mexico.
Yeah.
So that's where this question of Mexican solidarity becomes so important. Because, we don't have a government like Morena anywhere else in the world. They won overwhelmingly at the local, state, federal, and national levels. Overwhelmingly. The
Wow.
popularity is like 75%. So there's, the masses support this government, which means even more that the U.S. imperialism is going to want to put pressure on them.
Actually, Claudia Sheinbaum's acceptance is actually 85%. I think the left in Mexico is never going to go away. No se muevan, que sigue otro segmento
Es tiempo de transformación